Hello everyone and welcome to another video on our own devices. I'm Jean Messier and today we are looking at my precious. Hello everyone and welcome to another video on our own devices. I'm Jean Messier and today we're having a look at a trio of astronomical timepieces. I have here two portable sundials, one flat, one ring-shaped, as well as a miniature version of what's known as a stardial or a nocturnal, which, as the name implies, allows you to tell the time at night. So without further ado, let me show you exactly what these things are and how they work. So the first object I have here is known as a Sunwatch, and this was generously sent to me by one of my lovely viewers, so thank you so much for that. These were originally manufactured in the 1920s by the Ansonia Brass Company, founded in 1844 by entrepreneur Anson Green Phelps in what is now the town of Ansonia, Connecticut. In 1851, Phelps joined forces with clockmakers Theodore Terry and Franklin Andrews to form a subsidiary known as the Ansonia Clock Company. In 1877, this operation was moved to a new factory in Brooklyn, which in 1879 expanded to a second site. The parent company became the American Brass Company in 1893, while the clock division continued to manufacture all manner of timepieces through the 1920s, though they struggled to remain competitive and their catalog of products steadily dwindled. Finally, in 1929, just before the stock market crash, all the company's machinery, key workers, and other assets were sold to Amerikanskaya Torgovlia, aka Amtorg, the US trade mission of the Soviet Union, and shipped to Russia. So the Sunwatch was manufactured by Ansonia from 1920 until the company's sale in 1929, though this particular example is marked manufactured by the Outdoor Supply Company Incorporated, New York, USA, though whether Ansonia sold off their marketing rights at some point or this is just a temporary licensing agreement, I've not been able to determine. Also, this has two patent numbers and dates printed on it, number 463040 filed on April 20th, 1920, and number 147513 filed on May 10th, 1921. But these are apparently fake, and indeed entering them into Google Patents yields completely different inventions. The actual relevant patent is number 1418926A, filed on April 20th, 1920 by one George Hollinwood, who also patented several similar devices. The Sunwatch was heavily marketed towards groups like the Boy Scouts of America and widely advertised in publications like Field and Stream and Boys Life. And originally, these sold for only $1, quite a bargain since at the time even a cheap pocket watch would have run you $25, or around $440 today. Anyway, let's have a closer look at this and see exactly how it works. Originally, these came shipped in a cardboard box, but unfortunately I don't have one for this particular example. So to open this, we push a button at one end and the lid hinges open. Inside the lid, we have an instruction booklet we can pull out, and down below we can see our pointer or gnomon, which hinges out at three different angles, 35 degrees, 40 degrees, and 45 degrees to compensate for latitude. Actually, to get more technical, the whole structure is the gnomon, while the upper edge that actually casts the shadow on the dial is called the style. We can also see three different scales printed on the dial itself for 35, 40, and 45 degrees latitude. And finally, at the bottom, we have a magnetic compass for aligning the gnomon. Now, if this were what is known as an equatorial sundial, whose gnomon is parallel to the axis of the Earth and whose dial plate is parallel to the equator, then the path of the gnomon shadow around the dial plate would be perfectly circular, and the hour lines would be spaced at equal 15-degree increments. However, since we are now projecting the gnomon shadow onto a flat surface parallel to the Earth's surface, then this is no longer the case. The path of the shadow will now be elongated, and the hour lines will no longer be spaced equally. And this geometry further changes with latitude, with the path becoming more elongated as you move towards the equator and more circular as you move towards the poles. And indeed, at the poles, the path of the shadow will go back to being perfectly circular. And for this reason, you can't build a fixed flat sundial that works in all locations. You need to adjust the geometry of the dial plate and the gnomon based on your particular location, or make them adjustable, as is the case with the Sunwatch. If we look inside the lid of the Sunwatch, we can see a list of various cities within the United States along with their latitudes, allowing you to choose the appropriate gnomon setting and dial plate for your given location. Of course, this particular example is limited to those latitudes bounded by the lower 48 US states, from 30 degrees in southern Louisiana to 49 degrees at the Canadian border. For other locations, you need a different set of dial plates, gnomon angles, and reference cities. Indeed, there are rarer versions of the Sunwatch made for the British market and which are marked accordingly. Now, where I am in Winnipeg, I'm just north of Fargo at around 49.9 degrees, so I'd use the 45-degree gnomon angle and the innermost, most circular dial plate. Not perfectly accurate, but close enough. The next step is to use our built-in compass to align the Sunwatch with true north. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video on the Polaris course corrector and marine computer, link in the description, the geographic poles and the magnetic poles are not coaxial, and the difference between true and magnetic north, what is known as variation, changes depending on your position on the Earth's surface. Accordingly, the table inside the lid also lists the appropriate correction for each location. In the case of Fargo, or Winnipeg, 11 degrees east. The gnomon will now be pointing towards true north, and the sundial will indicate local solar time. But we're not quite done yet. See, because the Earth is tilted on its axis and its orbit around the sun is slightly eccentric, the length of each day actually varies slightly throughout the year. The difference between apparent solar time, that is the sun's actual motion through the sky, and mean solar time or clock time, assuming uniform motion around the equator, is known as the equation of time and must be compensated for. Now, I'm recording this video at the end of February, so according to these correction figures at the far right side of the table, I need to add 13 minutes to local solar time to get mean time. And finally, the table allows you to convert your local apparent time, or LAT, to the standard time of your time zone. And you do this by calculating the longitude difference between your location and that of the central meridian that defines the time zone, applying the rule of 4 minutes per degree. And if you are west of the meridian, you add time, and if you are east of the meridian, you subtract time. For example, Winnipeg lies 7 degrees west of the 90th meridian, so I add 7 degrees times 4 minutes, or 28 minutes to my local apparent time. So that is a lot of work to go through just to tell the time, but since this is considerably cheaper than a pocket watch and didn't require any winding or batteries, there were many advantages to carrying one of these, especially if you were out in the wilderness. Anyway, moving on, the next object we have here is a ring-shaped sundial known as an Aquitaine, after Eleanor of Aquitaine, who, according to legend, gifted one of these to King Henry II of England in 1152, so he would know when to leave the hunt and meet up with her for their romantic trysts. Unlike more conventional sundials, the Aquitaine uses not a shadow cast by a gnomon, but rather a point of light streaming through a small hole. And rather than tracking the movement of the sun around the horizon, it instead measures its altitude. So to use this, you have to compensate for the equation of time by rotating this inner dial to align the hole with the appropriate month. As you can see, this wraps around and reverses from the summer solstice in June to the winter solstice in December. Once this is set, you then suspend the ring from a chain or lanyard and point it towards the sun, reading the time from where the point of light falls on the scale on the inside surface of the ring. And notice that the scale goes up from 4 a.m. to noon and back down again from noon to 8 p.m., the spacing between the hour lines decreasing or bunching up near noon, just as in a flat sundial. You'll also notice the inscription Carpe Diem, seize the day, which is one of many standard Latin mottos often inscribed on sundials. Unfortunately, unlike the Sunwatch, there's no easy way of adjusting this particular Aquitaine for latitude, this design having been intended for use around London at 51 degrees north. However, there are more modern versions of Aquitaine sundial rings that have a set of reference lines that you can orient vertically in order to twist the ring and adjust it for differences in latitude. Anyway, moving on, our last object is what is known as a nocturnal or Nocturlabe, which was invented around the 16th century and, as the name suggests, allows you to tell the time at night according to the motion of the stars, what is known as sidereal time. Now, the sidereal day, that is the time it takes for the stars to make one complete revolution around the sky, is actually different from the solar day, that is the time it takes the sun to do the same. This is because by the time the Earth has completed one full rotation around its axis, it has also moved a short distance, around 1 degree, along its orbit around the sun, and thus must rotate slightly more in order for the sun to return to the same point in the sky, for example, local noon. And since, as I mentioned before, the Earth takes 4 minutes to rotate 1 degree, that means a solar day is 4 minutes longer than a sidereal day. Anyway, to use a nocturnal, you first rotate this inner dial to the current month, Then hold the instrument up the sky, aligning the hole in the center with the North Star Polaris. You then swing this longer arm until it points towards a designated reference star. This particular nocturnal is designed for use with the pointer stars Merak and Dubhe from Ursa Major, aka the Big Dipper, though larger versions often came with a second arm that could be aimed at Ursa Minor and were thus marked both bears. Alternatively, you can also use the star Shadar in Cassiopeia, since it is directly opposite Ursa Major in the sky. Once the arm is aligned, the time can then be read off the scale on the inner disk. And that, dear viewers, is a brief dip into the fascinating science and engineering of sundials. Now, sundial design is an absolutely enormous field. There are a whole bunch of different designs out there, each with their own unique features, and hopefully I will feature some of those in future videos. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time in another video where we'll look at yet more fascinating timepieces and other devices just like these. Until then, I'm Jean Messier from Our Own Devices. Have a great sidereal or solar day.